Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare podcast is excited to welcome Ghatak to the show today. JJ is well known in the entrepreneurial community. He founded OnLoop, which is a collaborative team development system that reinvents how teams are assessed and developed. He has a great background at companies like Uber and Accenture. He also has a MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and he brings a wealth of information and experience to the world of startup formation and entrepreneurial team management. So welcome to the show, JJ.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, tell us about OnLoop. You founded this in 2020, right?
Yeah, so OnLoop was born right before the pandemic really got fully underway, and we sort of shifted to a distributed and hybrid workplace. But the pain that led to OnLoop was something I experienced as a manager for many years before I started the company.
Wow. So tell us about some of that pain. I mean, what led you to say, geez, we need to fix this?
Yeah, I had sort of grown up in sort of large corporations, be it Accenture Management Consulting or, I guess Uber at some point became a large corporation. I joined when the company was 9,000 people. And when I left, it was 27,000.
It's funny how that happens to successful companies, isn't it?
Yeah. And I also had a privilege of leading teams of varying sizes. In my last role at Uber, I was effectively global COO for our BD and partnerships unit. And that was a 120-person org. And I was responsible for all of the strategic org setup, hiring its senior leaders, as well as sort of quarterly planning and calibrations for the team. And I just witnessed and was subject to these laborious processes around performance reviews, around managing OKRs, and all of it felt a lot more paperwork and bureaucratic versus actually useful in both achieving individual high performance as well as driving team high performance. And so coming out of Uber, within sort of 5 days of leaving, I wrote a 2-page document that I titled Talent Tech and how we just need to rethink very basic processes and approaches at the workplace that were unfortunately, in my view, designed for sort of HR compliance processes, but not to really bring out high performance. And so that made the job of a manager really tough in really sort of bringing the best out of the teams. And then over the last few years, we've been lucky to witness, obviously, a massive shift to hybrid work that has made that pain even greater, as well as the maturity of applied AI products. So we started working with GPT-3, which was OpenAI's large language model back in 2020, to start thinking about how can we automate performance reviews. And that's now expanded to we're using applied AI for a whole set of manager use cases to really take that friction out of managing teams on an everyday basis.
Fascinating. I think I lost something you said at the very beginning. So you might want to, if you could just repeat what you said about your background at large companies.
Yeah, so, I grew up through the system at Accenture Strategy for a few years. So started as an analyst and then left as a senior consultant and was running teams there. But then even at Uber, I sort of managed teams of a variety of sizes. And through that process, I saw managers like myself being subject to very laborious processes like performance reviews and OKRs that felt like form filling exercises that took up a lot of time and energy, but actually didn't help drive clarity for me or my teams. And I was determined to find a better way of goals and feedback in the organization because, I saw you spend some time at Stanford as well. And the GSB really sort of talked about the importance of feedback and building teams the right way. But what I saw in the workplace was very different from what I knew best practices were.
Right. So you were able to look at what was actually happening and the best practices and see a delta between them and
Correct.
Understand that there was a way to bridge that gap.
Correct. And people really spoke about continuous feedback. And the concept of continuous feedback has existed for a long time. but the tools and the processes didn't really make that a reality. And we've been also witness to a revolution in other industries like the fitness industry, where now everybody has a fitness tracker that tracks sleep, tracks exercise. Some of them can track diet and then gives you sort of micro suggestions on how to get better. And we think that habit building is now quite a well documented science on how you make people build the right micro habits. And when we combine that with using applied AI the right way, we can really sort of bring some of these promises into life.
Right, right. And so OnLoop as a company is really focused in this area of making teams better, assessed better, communicate better, developed better, and getting beyond some of these old traditional processes that are just there because they've grown over time and they aren't there for good reasons, right?
Yeah, and more than anything else, I think you also build product based on who you build for. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you think about the SaaS revolution of the last 10, 15 years, so the rise of DevOps tools or the rise of really good collaboration products or really good project management products, a lot of that happened because people stopped building for the CIO or the head of IT, but started building for individual designers or engineers themselves. And people still have the misnomer that managing people is the same thing as HR, but those two are very different things. And in organizations in the mainstream, and we're seeing more and more companies sort of, realize the same thing we're realizing, especially as applied AI gives everybody a new toolkit to rethink old problems. But we've been building products for HR, not for people managers. And therefore, today, when we serve businesses, we're very clear that we're solving a business problem. And that business problem is, doing more with less in this macroeconomic climate, and getting optimal productivity out of every team member, driving accountability and clarity in every part of the organization. And when you start serving those business needs, you just design products differently versus running HR management processes like performance management or buying a learning management system. You just see the world differently when you take an end user lens. And for us, that end user is managers of medium and large organizations.
Fantastic. Yeah, so OnLoop was founded during the pandemic when we
Correct.
all were forced to go remote. And
Yeah.
then post-pandemic, we've seen teams reform in interesting ways. There's hybrid
Yes.
teams, there's a return to office mandate, there's people who are fully remote. So how does OnLoop work with that kind of new world of work?
Yeah. And so we like the term hybrid. And when I was even at Uber pre-pandemic, I was working with people all around the world, right? Now I was taking
Mhm.
Zoom calls sitting in an office conference room. That just changed to a home conference room, right? But we've been working in distributed teams for a while,
Yeah.
especially technology organizations. And the return to office mandate, we believe, is because leaders are paranoid about the productivity of the organization. And actually, I was talking to a friend yesterday who was an engineering manager at a pretty large tech company, and they have a return to office mandate. And one of his very high performing engineers refuses to come back. And to be honest, that's fine, and people are okay with it. And so the productivity paranoia that leaders feel comes when they don't feel like they have an understanding of what's really going on in their org. So their proxy of solving that is bring people back into the office. And through that, they hope that they feel a greater sense of control of what's happening. And so we believe that the genie is out of the bottle with regards to how we work. And actually, one other piece of technology that I'm incredibly excited about as it sort of develops into mainstream is immersive virtual reality, and
Mm.
us having avatars which are very human-like in the metaverse, and whereby even you and I having this conversation could feel very much in person if it was built immersively. And so I think we will continue down this path of hybrid and distributed work. And what we're very focused on is how do you give leaders the clarity in a sort of non bureaucratic manner that doesn't make them anxious and therefore doesn't sort of get people back to an in office mandate. So we don't think an in office mandate really is needed from a productivity standpoint if orgs are intentionally managed the right way. I think the part that is harder to solve without in-person time is sort of building relationships and building a sense of camaraderie and sort of the non-work aspects of work. And actually, you see many startups doing either a monthly sort of summit or sort of finding a way to make sure that people are coming together at some regularity and cadence, but not bringing everyone into the office. Because frankly, you can run a much more cost efficient organization if you're able to hire talent in different places. Like we have a 15-person org, but we have people across the US, Canada, India, Philippines, Vietnam, and Singapore. And we have offices in New York and Singapore because, we have senior leaders or critical mass of folks. But we get to run a much more lean organization because we can hire people in various places. And we think that's great for global opportunity. It's great to sort of give access to great jobs in places where people do not have access to them for. But we just have to make hybrid work better. And we agree that today it doesn't work as well as it could in the future.
Right. I'm really intrigued by your mention of things like virtual reality, Vision Pro, things that really make it feel immersive, even though you're remote from one
Yes.
another, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is OnLoop doing in that field?
We don't do anything in immersive VR today, but I expect that to change as the technology becomes more mature. We keep a close eye on it, and we just don't think the tech is really there fully yet, both from a software and hardware perspective.
It's going to get there in the future, you hope.
Yeah, no, I really recommend people watching this Mark Zuckerberg, Lex Friedman podcast that got recorded maybe 6 months or so ago, where all of it was recorded in the metaverse.
Mhm.
But it was done after each of them spent a few hours in the Meta office, sort of almost having a bust of their upper bodies being created in the metaverse. So it's a
Right.
technology that's called codec avatars, and they're different from the sort of cartoony avatars that are more popular. And as that tech becomes more mainstream, I think that'll be a complete game changer for remote work. Another thing that our teams do is they use a product called Gather, which I don't love because it's a little bit cartoony, and I'm not a fan of these cartoony virtual reality products. But it sort of mimics an office setting, and people are at their virtual desks, and you can walk up to people and have conversations with them. So it gets a little bit closer to sort of the water cooler conversation that everybody says is the thing that they miss in remote work. But I'm in the camp that even if people are having return to office mandates, that is very much temporary, and the future is distributed and the future is hybrid.
Wow, that's quite a vote of confidence in that future. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think if we had a very short pandemic, if the pandemic would have been less than a year, I think the world wouldn't have changed its core structures and how it operates, and we might have seen a full bounce back. But I think it lasted long enough. That is now a permanent shift.
Wow, that's great to hear because I am fully in favor of hybrid teams as well, remote teams, people who can work from anywhere. I think it's also a matter of equity that if people need more work-life balance, say that they have a parent they're taking care of, or they have a child
Totally.
they need to pick up from school, being able to time shift and being able to get your work done in an environment where you can also take care of your family, I think that's huge. That really opens the work field to a lot of people who might have been excluded when they had to commute for an hour each way to work, you know?
No, absolutely. I tell people that we don't work in a factory line anymore. The notion
Mhm.
of an 8-hour shift comes from assembly line. And actually, humans are not productive working 8-hour shifts. They're more productive working 2-hour shifts, taking an hour off and then doing another 2-hour shift. And so I think that many leaders are shooting themselves in the foot a little bit by forcing people back to work because that also creates a level of resentment from the other side. And we just have to bite the bullet and really get to the core issues of why remote hybrid may not be working, and then use products like ours to make it work. And with people, old habits die hard, and we're all creatures of habit. And a lot of leaders are not young, And so they're used to managing in an in-person workspace, and that's what they push people back to.
Right, right. So you also have mentioned in other contexts the fact that the work that we're doing today is largely knowledge. Like I
Hmm.
come to the office and I answer emails, or
Hmm.
I work on a document, or I
Hmm.
analyze a spreadsheet. And so tell me more about knowledge work. Like there's a billion knowledge workers out there, right?
That's correct. And the billion knowledge workers making the numbers not exactly fully calculated, but somewhere between $7 and $1 trillion of knowledge worker wages.
Hmm. That's a huge economy.
That's a huge economy, and I think that economy is also going to go through a pretty large change with generative AI. And one of my other beliefs is that most cognitive tasks that we do that don't require a great deal of human judgment will also end up getting automated.
Mm.
And so most of the emails we write and most of the spreadsheets that we make, I even today, if you tried really hard, you could get a machine do a large chunk of that. And I think that will only get better. And I think the only way to be a successful knowledge worker in tomorrow's world is to be very adept at how to use AI and AI agents the right way. In the same way, our generation above us had to learn how to use a computer, right? And a lot of
Hmm.
them
Hmm.
resisted using a computer. And this computer
It's
was
true.
this alien thing to use. And many people feel that same way about, generative AI tools and agentic models to build workflows and things like that. But the reality is that if you don't learn how to get efficiency using machines effectively, you will get left behind. And then B, I think that even if you think about our schooling and even our business school education, we don't spend a lot of time talking about judgment or decision making. But that will be one of the few things that will be left in the human domain because we live in a culture where if something goes wrong, we need a human to blame. And so you'll never have a world where you'll have an AI CEO because if a company commits fraud, you have to sue somebody. You can't sue an AI or not yet. But in terms of call center agents, we will have the vast majority of level one, level two support being done by AI agents. And then
Hmm.
only very complex issues getting elevated to a human because they might require exception handling or making certain judgment calls that we don't feel comfortable technologies making. And that's why I find the world of work today fascinating. And I think the mistake some people make is they call it HR tech. I'm like, it has
Hmm.
nothing to do with HR. It's sort of how we show up to work every day, which is a huge economy. I like the word future of work. And Gen AI is our industrial revolution when it comes to knowledge work. And I constantly get kept on my toes, seeing how quickly things are changing. And even us as a company, our primary interface for our product was a mobile app in the past. We're rethinking that today as we see conversational AI surfaces get really good at sort of going back and forth with a human user to tackle tough problems. So the very basis of how we interact with technology is being questioned as we speak. And for people like me who are excited by a lot of challenges, that's exciting and fascinating. I think a lot of people that is just downright scary. Mm.
Right. But if I can just double click on something there, you mentioned this is not HR technology, but you
Correct.
have a proprietary framework. It's called the Collaborative Team Development. I think that you have a trademark on CTD,
Yeah.
and you talk about there being 5 layers that are
Yeah.
critical for high performance. So could you tell
Yes.
us about those 5 critical layers?
Yeah, so our framework really came about through our work, both with thousands of managers that we work with now, as well as sort of conversations with various professors at Stanford as I was sort of bring the company together. That leadership and management has daunted humans for a long time. So people believe that being a leader or being a manager is really tough and has all of these various components that are tough to understand. But in the same way that we've unraveled health and fitness, where we've broken it down into diet, sleep, and exercise, and then human relationships, and knowing that, if you're not healthy, there's something wrong in those constituent parts, and some of them are more important than others. We've sort of drawn that same parallel to individual performance and seen that if someone's a low performer, the first thing to check is how the person's doing on motivation or energy. And if they're demotivated for whatever reason, be it something going on in the workplace or it could be something happening at home, sort of solving that becomes more important than everything else. And that's the foundational layer in our model. The layer above that is driving deep clarity around an individual's goals or a team's goals. And we define goals as either targets, so certain hard KPIs to hit, or executing on certain projects, or developing certain skills. And that every person's work is a combination of targets, projects, and skills that is different from a framework like OKRs that believes that everybody's work can be neatly classified into an objective and key result. And we actually just don't think that's possible. A business can do that really well, but that rarely trickles down to the individual level the right way. And so we call sort of energy and goals as the two base layers of performance. And if an individual is low performing on a team, we should have urged managers to only focus on those two and not think about giving that person constructive feedback or other things that are actually at higher levels in that model. The next three layers in the model are critical for sustaining performance. So the next layer is celebrate feedback, so what people call praise or kudos. But people usually see that important for recognition. Actually, what is even more important about celebrate feedback is helping people identify their superpowers. Because when someone can articulate really well that I am good at one, two, and three, that actually is a huge driver of performance. And then the last two layers, the improve feedback to identify blind spots and driving continuous growth, is really what high performers need. The high performers will often leave an organization if they don't feel like they're learning and growing, where they're crushing their goals, they're excited to show up to work, they know their superpowers, but they feel like they're stagnant. And in those cases, it's very important for managers to have observations that help people get to the next level, which is our improve layer. And then the final layer, which is the grow layer, is for people to continuously consume content or get access to coaching that makes them better. And so, all across those five layers, if you have a motivated employee who's productive and growing, then you have a high performance organization. But those five have a hierarchy to it. And if someone is just not motivated to show up to work, driving continuous growth and development is not going to do anything for them. And we think that those five layers, if managed on an intentional sort of daily or weekly basis, can turn every manager into a great manager. And in fact, we can get even AI to really support in helping managers sense check whether team members have clarity across those five layers. And which is why, it's a little bit controversial, but I'm not sure in a future world people should be managing 3 to 5 person teams. Maybe we should get AI to be managing 3 to 5 person teams. And then human managers managing 15, 20, 25 person teams, whereby AI can help drive the simple cadences. And then humans can solve the more complex things. And so our core belief is that being a manager should not be rocket science or should not be this thing that's not accessible to folks. All organizations complain about first time managers and they don't know how to manage. And it's a huge issue that we see across all of our customers. And we think technology can be very helpful, sort of put in the context of the right framework.
That's really interesting. And you come to this type of work through a fantastic background. You have work that you've done at Uber, you worked at Accenture, and I know that you brought some negative findings out of that, like things not to do. But I'm sure that
Yes.
you also learned a great deal by driving strategy internationally for Uber or, over at Accenture by being able to be a strategy consultant. So I'm just curious how the world of work has shaped you.
Yeah, I think that I've been lucky to be in talent dense teams, or I've gone to one of the top business schools in the world and sort of have had access to really understand that the things that a good manager does really brings out the best in their teams. And I tell people like the top 5% of managers don't need OnLoop to be good, right? They
Mm-hmm.
can do it themselves. But there's 80% of managers who have the intentions of being a good manager, but just don't know how to and are overwhelmed by all of the components of it. And so, what we've been able to do is take sort of not just mine, but our collective team's experiences and productionize that into a cohesive framework and a technology product um, that hopefully allows everyone to have access to the toolkit and the methodologies of great managers and great leaders. Um, and that's what we're really after. And I would have never been able to do that had I not had the good fortune of not just the organizations I've been a part of, but also seeing what great managers look like, and then seeing what bad managers look like, and then try and bridge that gap.
Right. I wonder if you could tell us about a great manager that you've had. Who really inspired you or mentored you, either at Stanford or at some of your previous your previous companies?
Yeah, I actually wrote a post about this a couple of days ago. Early in my career, the guy who hired me at Accenture, a gentleman by the name James Chatham, he lives in Chicago now and is a partner at EY Parthenon. And in my early days as a management consultant, there were certain situations in which I was just lethargic about the work that I was doing. And I was just not motivated to do so because it just felt like rote work. But he was able to really inspire me into really understanding where my strengths lie, and the goals that he and the organization had for me, in order to motivate me to do the things I didn't enjoy.
Hmm.
Um, and good leaders can make people do things that they don't like or go against because they show them sort of the greater purpose that they're serving. And in this case, it wasn't like we were solving global hunger, we were management consultants, but he was able to show that he cares and he cares about my long term role in the organization. And that often drives that foundational motivation that people need to leverage their superpowers and build them the right way. And, there are multiple examples in my career that have shown me that no matter how driven I might be, like if I'm not motivated, that drive or that ability doesn't really get you anywhere. And that's why in our framework, we really put that motivation at the base. And people often have thought about motivation as this nice to have thing that sits next to productivity. But in my career, I've seen how much being motivated affects my own performance. And what great managers have been able to do for me is motivate me and motivate me for the right reasons. And then make sure that I feel like they've got my back. And that has allowed me to focus on doing good work and executing and not on having to play politics or gain visibility because they've looked after me. And so the one trait that I've seen in good managers that I've had is that they consistently demonstrated that they've got my back. And that's not always been the case. And in cases where that's not been the case, I've had to graciously distance myself from them.
Right, right. Well, a great manager will really make a job meaningful.
Hmm.
I think I have similar experiences where I was demotivated and a great manager brought my passion back. So I
Yeah.
entirely agree with you. Yeah. So JJ, we're kind of coming to the end of our time, and I just wondered if you could tell us, what do you dare to dream?
Yeah, I think about the world for myself in terms of a passion portfolio. So I've never really
Hmm.
believed in hobbies, and I think hobbies are a waste of time. And I know they aren't. And my psychologist has spent a lot of time with me trying to explain to me why hobbies matter. But I have a life purpose portfolio that A has my wife and son as pillar A, has my company OnLoop and our mission to So really bring out the best in every knowledge worker as pillar two. And the country of Singapore, which, I recently became Singaporean, and I feel it's a country that's done a lot for me as the third. And so my dream of a dream world, which is highly productive and happy, is every person finding what's in their purpose portfolio and then serving that portfolio with their time, their resources, and their energy. And that sort of not only makes people more productive, but it keeps people more healthy. It makes them not sit in front of the TV all day or sort of be out partying all the time. Because Viktor Frankl, who's a famous psychologist, talked about how purpose and pleasure sit on both sides of the same coin. And when people find purpose, they forget about pleasure. And I think a world in which everybody lived a life of purpose would just be a better world.
Wow, that's a great quote to close on. A life where everybody lived according to purpose would be a better world. Thank you so much, JJ. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on Dare, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on Dare, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. Dare is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.